The word landed like a closed fist. Not whispered, not implied. Spoken clearly, in front of 43 people seated around the longest boardroom table in the Hartwell Tower, during what was supposed to be a routine quarterly review. You're an embarrassment to stand next to. Conrad Ashby said it to Juniper Voss the way a man says something he has rehearsed. Slowly, with the pleasure of someone who has been saving it. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't glance around the room to check who was listening. He wanted witnesses. That was the point. Juniper had been placing the revised earnings summary on the table in front of him. Pages. She had corrected at 11 the previous night. Pages the senior analyst had submitted with 17 calculation errors she had caught herself, fixed herself, reprinted herself at her own desk using her own paper because the third-floor printer had been out of service since Monday. She'd stayed until the building's cleaning crew asked her, politely, if she needed the lights kept on. Conrad looked at the summary, then looked at her. His eyes moved the way men's eyes move when they are trying to make a point about your body without saying the word body. How does Hartwell expect clients to take us seriously, he said, when this is what they see walking into the room? Nobody moved. 43 people, the CFO, the legal team, 4 international partners who had flown in from Vancouver and Montreal, 3 board members, 2 of Conrad's own subordinates who owed their positions to letters of recommendation he had written. Not one person said a word. Juniper's hand stopped on the table. The pages fanned slightly beneath her palm. She could feel her pulse in her throat, in her wrists, in the backs of her knees. She knew her face was going red. She had never been able to stop that. The blood rising, the heat, the visible proof of humiliation she couldn't keep internal. Conrad wasn't finished. "We've been through this," he said, straightening his jacket. "The optics matter in this room. They matter to our clients. I'm not going to keep pretending otherwise." He picked up the earnings summary without looking at it. Someone else should be bringing these in. There was a sound at the far end of the table. Not a voice, not movement. Just the quiet click of a pen being set down. Everett Soane hadn't spoken since the meeting began. He rarely did in these settings. He sat where he always sat. At the end of the table opposite the presentation screen, in the chair that no one else ever chose, because no one else wanted to sit that far from the projector. He had arrived 12 minutes before anyone else. His jacket was folded over the back of his chair. His sleeves were rolled to the forearm. In front of him sat a single leather notebook, closed, and a cup of black coffee, untouched. He had been reading something. No one was entirely sure what. Now he was looking up. He didn't look at Conrad. He looked at Juniper. His expression told no one anything. That was the part people always struggled to explain afterward. Not that he looked angry, not that he looked cold, but that his face simply contained no information that he hadn't chosen to put there. It was the face of someone who made decisions the way weather systems moved, without asking permission. He stood. The sound of his chair on the hardwood was the only sound in the room. He walked the length of the table, not quickly, not slowly, and when he reached Juniper, he did not speak to Conrad. He did not speak to the room. He looked at the pages still beneath her hand and said quietly, "You found the calculation errors. It wasn't a question." Juniper looked at him. "Yes, the original submission had 17. She nodded once, carefully. "You caught all of them? Yes. I checked twice." Everett picked up the corrected summary from the table in front of Conrad. He turned it over once, looked at the bottom of the last page, and set it back down. "You also reformatted the fiscal year projection table," he said. "The one legal submitted last week. The column headers were misaligned. The version you corrected this morning is the one that will be presented to the Montreal partners." Juniper stared at him. She hadn't told anyone about the projection table. She'd fixed it at 7 in the morning, uploaded it to the shared server, and sent no notification because she hadn't been sure if she was overstepping. "You knew," she said before she could stop herself. Everett's voice was very even. "I know who does the actual work in this building." Something happened in Conrad Ashby's expression. It started as confusion and moved, slowly, toward understanding. Everett finally looked at him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Say it again," he said. Conrad blinked. "I beg your pardon? What you said to her?" Everett held his gaze. "Say it again." The silence in the room changed quality. It became the kind of silence that has weight. Conrad laughed once, a sound with no humor in it. "Everett, this is a— Say it again!" Nobody breathed. Conrad did not say it again. Everett turned away from him. He picked up his notebook from the end of the table and his jacket from the back of his chair. He looked at the CFO. "The meeting is adjourned." He looked at the Montreal partners. "I'll have Juniper send you the full corrected package by 3 o'clock. He looked finally at his head of operations, a quiet man named Calloway, who had been sitting 2 seats from the door for the past hour, and said only 2 words: "Handle it." Calloway nodded once. He didn't ask what that meant. He already knew. Conrad Ashby's car was towed from the Hartwell Tower parking garage at 2:47 that afternoon. This was unusual, because Conrad had a permanent reserved space, a space that had his name stenciled on the concrete in white paint, a space he had used every working day for 11 years. He was told there had been an administrative error. His corporate credit card declined at 3:15 at the restaurant where he was hosting what was supposed to be a private lunch with 2 junior partners. The restaurant apologized. They ran it twice. They ran a second card. That one declined as well. At 3:34, he received an email from the firm's technology department informing him that his executive access credentials had been flagged for review pending a compliance audit. His building access card had been temporarily suspended. His email would remain operational for urgent communications only. At 4:10, his assistant informed him, via text message, that she had accepted a transfer to the Montreal office, effective immediately. She was sorry for the short notice. At 4:23, the chair of the compensation committee, a man Conrad had golfed with for 8 years, called to say that Conrad's contract renewal had been placed on hold pending a board decision. He sounded genuinely uncomfortable. He said he couldn't say more. He said he was sorry. At 4:45, Conrad's private club sent a letter. An actual letter, printed on club stationery, not an email, informing him that his membership had been suspended pending a review of conduct standards. He called 6 people in the next 2 hours. 3 sent him to voicemail. 2 answered and said they couldn't help him. 1 asked him, very gently, who exactly he thought he had been speaking to in that boardroom this morning. Conrad sat in the parking lot of a coffee shop 2 blocks from Hartwell Tower. He had taken a cab because his car was gone, and he looked at his phone and tried to understand how, in the space of 5 hours, every institutional door that had ever opened for him had closed. Nobody mentioned Everett Soane's name. They didn't have to. Juniper drove home in silence. She didn't put on the radio. She didn't call anyone. She just drove, with both hands on the wheel and the city moving past her windows in the early dark of a November afternoon in Toronto. And she tried to figure out what had just happened to her life. She had worked at Hartwell Capital for 4 years. She'd come up through the back door. An accounting contract that had turned into a permanent role, that had turned into a senior analyst position, that came with no raise, and a title that impressed no one. She knew the firm's financials better than some of the partners. She could read a balance sheet the way other people read text messages, fast and fluent and without effort. She noticed things. She always had. Numbers had a logic to them that people didn't, and she had learned early that the safest place to be was behind the numbers, invisible, essential, unremarkable. She had never wanted to be remarkable. Remarkable meant seen. Seen meant judged. She knew what happened to women who looked like her when they got seen in rooms like that one. Conrad had simply said out loud what she had spent 4 years, assuming everyone was thinking quietly. She wasn't stupid. She knew how boardrooms worked. She knew what the optics conversation really meant. She'd spent years making herself small enough to be useful without being visible enough to be threatened. She'd become very good at it. She thought she was fine. She was almost home when her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A message from a number she didn't recognize. Toronto area code, no name in her contacts. Mr. Soane would like to meet. Tomorrow morning, 7:30. The address is attached. She stared at it at a red light. She almost didn't go. The address led her to a building on King Street West that she had walked past 100 times without knowing what it contained. The exterior was unremarkable. Dark glass, no signage, the kind of facade that communicated nothing. A security panel beside the front door had no company name on it, only a number pad. Before she could figure out what to do, the door opened from the inside. A man was standing there. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, wearing a dark coat with no visible affiliation. He had the stillness of someone who had spent years learning to occupy space without calling attention to it. "Mrs. Voss," he said. "I'm Thatcher. Welcome." She followed him through a lobby that looked, from the outside, like it belonged to a mid-sized accounting firm, and looked, from the inside, like nothing she could have described accurately to someone who hadn't seen it. The ceilings were 3 stories high. The walls were lined with monitoring equipment. People sat at long, curved desks, working on screens she couldn't read from this angle, speaking in low voices into headsets, moving with the coordinated quiet of people who knew exactly what they were doing and had been doing it for a long time. Thatcher led her to a set of glass doors at the far end and pressed his thumb to a biometric panel. The doors opened. Everett Sane was standing at a windows-to-ceiling wall of data. He was reading something on one of the screens. Shipping manifests, she thought, though she only caught a glimpse. And he didn't turn around when she came in. He said, without preamble, "Tell me what you know about the Hartwell, Quebec portfolio." She blinked. "Good morning. Good morning. Tell me what you know about the Hartwell, Quebec portfolio." She crossed her arms. "I know the Q3 numbers were filed with a gross margin error of 1.3% that no one on the audit team caught. I know the error originated in the same spreadsheet template that's been used since 2019. I know the template was designed by someone who didn't understand how Canadian tax treatment interacts with international expense categories. I know the error has compounded across 6 quarters and represents approximately $4.2 million in misreported earnings." Silence. Everett finally turned around. He looked at her the way she had seen very few people look at anyone. Not with surprise, not with assessment, but with something that was closer to recognition, as though he was confirming something he had already suspected. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He leaned against the desk behind him, arms crossed, and studied her. "How long have you known?" 18 months. You didn't report it." "I reported it to my direct supervisor. He told me to leave it. He said the audit team had signed off and reopening it would create liability exposure." "His name?" "I'd rather not. His name." She paused. "Gregor Falk." Everett didn't write it down. He didn't need to. "Why did you stay after that?" It was a strange question. Or maybe it wasn't. She took a moment to think about it honestly. "Because someone has to catch the errors," she said finally. "If I leave, whoever replaces me won't know where to look." Everett held her gaze for a long moment. "You've been protecting a company that didn't know you were doing it. That's generally how it works." Something shifted at the edge of his expression. Not quite a smile, but close to one, in the way that a city is close to the thing you wanted before you realized what you actually wanted. He pushed a thin folder across the desk toward her. She opened it. She went very still. It was a full audit of the Hartwell, Quebec portfolio. Every error she had found, and several she hadn't. The misreported earnings, the template origin, Gregor Falk's name, circled, attached to 3 separate instances of suppressed internal reports. The $4.2 million figure, and beside it, in red, A corrected number she hadn't calculated herself because she hadn't had access to the international transaction logs. Corrected figure, $5.8 million. You've had this for how long? She asked. 7 weeks. She looked up at him. Then why is this the first time we've spoken? Everett stood up from the desk. He walked to the window wall. Outside, through the glass, Lake Ontario was grey and flat and enormous in the morning cold. Because I needed to know, he said. Whether you were protecting Hartwell because you were afraid or because you actually believed it mattered. She didn't answer right away. She thought about the question the way she thought about numbers. Not reaching for the comfortable answer, but for the accurate one. Both, she said. It's usually both. He turned. That's the honest answer. Did you expect a different one? No, he said. That's why you're here. She didn't fully understand what here meant until 3 days later. She had been told only that Everett had some questions about the Hartwell audit and that she could, if she chose, assist in reviewing certain financial materials. Thatcher had met her both mornings. She had been given a temporary access badge. She had been shown to a desk in the secondary analysis room, which looked like a regular office and functioned as something considerably more layered than that. On the third morning, she arrived to find a different room set up, longer, darker, with a screen at the front that covered most of one wall. Thatcher had said nothing. He'd just held the door open. There were 8 people in the room when she walked in. She recognized one of them, a woman named Iris Chadwick, who worked in Hartwell's compliance department and who Juniper had always assumed was simply very good at her job. Sitting across from Iris was a man she recognized from a financial post profile she had read 6 months ago. Reeve Dorchester, who was, according to that profile, a private infrastructure investor with interests across 3 provinces. She had not known Reeve Dorchester and Everett Soane were connected in any way. She was beginning to understand that she had not known a great many things. Everett spoke for 11 minutes. What he outlined, without raising his voice or using a single slide, was this. For the past 22 months, someone had been using the Hartwell Quebec portfolio as a laundering vehicle for money connected to a specific set of infrastructure contracts in Ontario and British Columbia. The amount was not small. The method was not new. What made it unusual was the precision of it, the way each misrepresented figure had been calibrated to fall just below the threshold that would trigger automatic audit flags. Whoever had designed the system understood exactly where the oversight gaps were. They've been inside the firm, Everett said, for a long time. Reeve looked at Juniper. And you found it. I found a part of it, she said carefully. I didn't know what I was looking at. You knew enough to keep it. She looked at the folder in her hands. The same folder Everett had given her on the first morning, now annotated in her own handwriting across 3 pages. I kept it because I didn't know who to trust. Reeve nodded slowly. Smart. It's not smart, she said. It's just. She stopped. What? Everett asked. It's just what you do when you've spent enough time being the person in the room nobody expects to be paying attention. She paused. You learn to watch without looking like you're watching. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Iris said very quietly, That's actually the most useful thing anyone has said in 22 months. On the 4th day, something changed. An analyst came into the room where Juniper was working and said, evenly, that there had been a new transaction flagged. An outgoing wire transfer from a Hartwell subsidiary account, time-stamped that morning, carrying Juniper's digital authorization code. She looked up from her screen. I don't have authorization access to subsidiary accounts. You do as of Monday. I was given read-only access. The transfer carries your credentials. The room went quiet. Everett was standing in the doorway. He had been there for perhaps 20 seconds before anyone noticed. He looked at the flag transaction on the analyst's screens, and then at Juniper, and his expression was the same as it had been in the Hartwell boardroom. Not readable, not accusatory, only watchful. "Show me," he said. She pulled her chair to the screen. She looked at the timestamp, the account number, the authorization chain. Her hands were steady. The rest of her was not. She understood what this looked like. She also understood, with the particular certainty that comes from spending your life inside spreadsheets, that something in the structure was wrong. She went into the authorization log. She tracked the credential path. She followed it backward, through 3 routing layers until she found what she was looking for. "My access token refreshes every 41 seconds, she said. "It's set that way because I built the security protocol myself when they gave me elevated access. I didn't trust the default." She highlighted a number in the log. "This token was used at an interval of 28 seconds. Whoever forged my credentials copied the static signature. They didn't know about the dynamic refresh." She looked at Everett. "They're good, but they built their forgery on what they thought I had, not on what I actually built." The room was quiet for a long time, Thatcher said, from the corner of the room. "We've confirmed. The wire transfer was intercepted at the processing layer. No funds moved." Everett looked at Juniper for a moment. Then he said, to the room, "She's right. Find the origin." He didn't say anything else about it. He didn't thank her. He didn't comment on the fact that she had just cleared herself in under 4 minutes. He simply turned back to the main screen and said, "What else moved today?" She realized later, sitting in the cab home, that she had expected him to be surprised, that she had been braced for it. For the moment when he would recalculate her, reframe her, adjust his assessment. She had been expecting the moment men decided what they thought about her. It hadn't come. He had asked her to show him, and she had shown him, and he had accepted what she showed him and moved to the next thing, as though it had never occurred to him that she might be wrong. She didn't know what to do with that. It took 2 more weeks. In those 2 weeks, Juniper learned things she was not sure she would ever be able to unknow. She learned that Hartwell Capital was, in the most technical sense, a legitimate financial institution, and that it was also, in a less technical and considerably more accurate sense, one of 17 nodes in a private financial network that Everett Sohn had been mapping for 4 years. She learned that Reeve Dorchester was not a private investor, but a federal financial crimes analyst, operating under a specific mandate she was not given details about. She learned that Iris Chadwick had been placed inside Hartwell's compliance department 18 months ago, for the same reason she herself had apparently been worth watching, because both of them had a specific and unusual capacity for finding things inside numbers that didn't want to be found. She learned that the person behind the money movement was named Barrett Quill, a name that meant nothing to her, and apparently meant a great deal to everyone else in that room. She learned that Barrett Quill was connected to 6 infrastructure contracts across the country, 2 senators, 1 Ontario cabinet minister, and 3 international banking executives whose firms appeared on the board of directors of a company that held the title to a significant percentage of port-facing real estate in British Columbia. She learned, on the 14th day, that Barrett Quill knew who she was. Thatcher told her, matter-of-factly, on a Tuesday morning. He said it the way he said everything, without visible concern, with the directness of someone who believed she deserved information about her own situation. He said that Quill's people had identified her 3 days ago and had attempted to obtain her home address through a property records request. "The request was redirected," Thatcher said. "You've been staying in the Rosedale safe house since Thursday." Juniper blinked. "I know where you live. You haven't been home since Thursday. We redirected you each evening." She thought about the past 4 nights, the slight variations in the route, the different driver on Wednesday, the way her coffee had already been prepared when she arrived each morning. "You didn't tell me," she said. "No," he said without apology, "because you didn't want me to behave differently." Thatcher looked at her, Because Everett didn't want you frightened. She thought about that. He should have told me anyway, she said. Yes, Thatcher agreed. He should have. That evening, Everett came to the secondary analysis room at 8 o'clock, later than usual. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, I should have told you. Yes, she said. He sat down across from her desk. It was the first time she'd seen him sit in that room. He always stood. She wasn't sure why that detail mattered, but it did. Barrett Quill will move soon, he said. He knows the window is closing. When he moves, he'll move against the access points he believes are still open. He paused. You're one of them. Because he thinks he can still use my credential. Because he believes you're isolated. He doesn't know what you know. He thinks you're a junior analyst who found an accounting error and got taken somewhere quiet to keep her from talking. He looked at her. I need you to let him believe that for a little longer. She was quiet. She looked at the screen in front of her, at the network of names and companies and dollar amounts she had spent 2 weeks mapping. At the authorization logs she had rebuilt from the ground up, at the secondary accounting layer that no one except her knew existed, because no one except her had thought to look in the right place. What happens after? She asked. After Quill moves and we have what we need, what happens to all of it? The portfolio, the network, the people who built it inside Hartwell. Everett was quiet for a moment. Prosecution, regulatory action, structural dissolution of the companies involved. It will be slow. Several years, and Hartwell. He looked at her. That depends. On what? On whether the firm has leadership capable of operating without the revenue it's been hiding. She turned to look at him directly, and Conrad Ashby. Everett's expression did not change. Conrad Ashby is no longer employed by Hartwell Capital. He resigned this morning. She hadn't known. She had been so deep inside the work that she'd stopped tracking anything outside the room. Because of what happened in the boardroom. Because of what happened in the boardroom, Everett said, and 17 other things that were already in motion. He paused. I want to be clear with you about something. What I did that day, the immediate consequences for Conrad, that wasn't strategy. That was simpler than strategy. She waited. He spoke about you that way in front of me, Everett said, and I found I was not willing to let it stand. She looked at him. She was not sure what to say. I'm telling you that, he said, because you deserve to know the difference between when I'm making a calculation and when I'm simply reacting to something. Which was that? A reaction, he said. A fairly strong one. The room was quiet. Outside, the city made its November sounds, whined off the lake, a distant streetcar. The particular silence that Canadian cold creates after 9 at night when most people have gone inside. The reaction was noted, she said carefully. Something in his expression shifted. Not much, but enough. Barrett Quill made his move on a Thursday at 11 minutes past midnight. It was elegant, as these things went. A coordinated series of transactions across 6 accounts. Time to complete before the European markets opened. Structured to pass through 3 separate correspondent banks in the 37-second window between automated audit cycles. It was the kind of thing that would have worked against any standard system. Juniper had built a different system. She had built it in the second week, quietly, in the early mornings before anyone else arrived, using the access she had been given and a set of secondary protocols she had designed herself. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she had looked at the existing system and understood, intuitively, where it was wrong. She had told Everett about it on a Tuesday afternoon in 2 sentences. He had said, "Show me." He had shown him. Finish it. At 11:13, every transaction Quill initiated hit her secondary layer and stopped. At 11:14, the alerts went out simultaneously to 7 regulatory bodies, each receiving a different piece of the same evidentiary package, separated intentionally, so that each agency believed it was acting on its own independent investigation. At 11:15, 3 addresses in Toronto and 1 in Calgary were entered by federal officers. Quill was in the Calgary address. He had been there for 6 days, which meant he had known, before he moved, that his primary location had been compromised. He had not known the Calgary address had been given to Everett's team by a logistics coordinator named Patrice Hollings, who had been passing Quill information for 22 months and who had, 11 days ago, decided that Quill was considerably more dangerous than anything Everett Soane might do to him. Quill was arrested at 11:29. Juniper was in the analysis room when the confirmation came. She was sitting at her desk. She had been there since 7 that morning. She had drunk 4 coffees and eaten a sandwich at some point around 2 in the afternoon and had not otherwise moved. When the confirmation appeared on her screen, she sat very still for a moment, looking at it, and then she put her hands flat on the desk and breathed. Thatcher came in. "Confirmed," he said. "I know," she said. "I can see it." He nodded. He started to leave. "Thatcher." He turned. She wasn't sure what she was going to say. She said, "How long had he been planning to use my credentials?" Thatcher paused. "We believe 8 months. He knew about you before you were brought into the building. You showed up on his radar when you flagged the Quebec portfolio internally, and Gregor Falk killed the report. He had Falk reporting to him." She absorbed this. "He was watching me for 8 months. You were useful to him because you had access and because you were." He stopped. "Because I was what?" she said. Thatcher chose his words carefully. "Because he believed you would be easy to discredit if anything went wrong. That if it came to a question of credibility, his team would win." She understood what he meant. She understood which specific characteristics of her life Quill had believed would make her a useful and disposable tool. "He was wrong," Thatcher said. "Yes," she said. "He was. There was a shareholders' meeting. There was always a shareholders' meeting. This one took place 3 weeks later, in a downtown Toronto hotel that was not Hartwell's usual venue, in a room that was larger and more public than anyone had anticipated, because word had gotten out, carefully, through the right channels, at the right time, and there were financial journalists, and 3 cameras from national news outlets, and several faces Juniper recognized from the business pages of papers she had read in quiet moments at her desk over the past 4 years. Everett spoke for 14 minutes. He presented facts, not commentary, not narrative, not drama, only the documented evidence of what had been done, and by whom and how it had been caught. He was precise and he was quiet, and by the time he finished, 3 board members had already confirmed their resignations to their lawyers. Then he said, "I want to introduce the person responsible for finding the mechanism that made this possible." Juniper was standing to the side of the stage. She was wearing a coat she had bought 2 days ago because Iris had told her, gently and with great affection, that her original coat had seen better days. She had bought something in a deep burgundy that she liked and that fit her the way clothes sometimes did when you stopped trying to find a version of yourself that was smaller than you actually were. She walked out. The room did not erupt. It settled. The way a room settles when it is recalibrating what it expected against what it has just been shown. She spoke for 7 minutes. She said what was true, that she had worked inside a financial system for 4 years, believing that the most useful thing she could be was invisible, that she had caught things because nobody thought she was looking, that she had stayed because she believed the work mattered, even when the people she did it for didn't particularly notice it happening, she said. "I spent a long time in rooms like this one, trying to take up as little space as possible. I thought that was what you had to do. I've recently learned that I was wrong, and that the people who benefit most from women believing that are the people trying to use those women's invisibility as a tool." Silence. Then, from somewhere near the back, someone began to applaud. They were the last ones in the building. This was, Juniper thought, a recurring pattern where Everett Soane was concerned. He was standing at the window. It was winter now, properly winter, the kind of Toronto cold that settles into pavement and glass and does not leave until April. Snow was falling outside, slow and indifferent over the lake. "You didn't prepare that speech," he said. "No, it was better for it." She looked at him. He was still watching the snow. She had noticed, over the past weeks, that he did this, looked at things for longer than people expected, with an attention that felt less like distraction and more like the opposite of it. Like he was doing something specific with the looking. "Quill's network," she said. "How much of it is left?" "Enough to keep several government agencies occupied for the next 2 years." He paused. "Quill will cooperate. He has incentives. The senator, and the minister, and the 3 banking executives," he turned. "It will be slow. It will be largely invisible to the public. Several people will face consequences that feel inadequate to the size of what they did. That's how it usually goes. Does that bother you?" "Yes," he said simply. "It used to bother me more. I've learned to measure differently." She nodded. "Measure what?" He looked at her the way he sometimes did. That particular attention. Whether the city is safer tomorrow than it was today. That's the only metric that's ever made sense to me. He paused. Most people don't know that someone is keeping that metric. They're not supposed to. "Is that lonely?" she asked, before she could think better of it. He was quiet for a moment. "It has been," he said. She didn't know what to do with that either. She was finding, more and more, that she had a growing category of things she didn't know what to do with, most of them Everett adjacent, and that this category was less uncomfortable than it used to be. He opened his briefcase. He removed a single envelope and held it out to her. She opened it. Inside was a document she had not seen before, with a title at the top that took her a moment to understand. Senior Partner, Financial Intelligence. Soane Group. She looked up. "This isn't Hartwell." "No," he said. "Hartwell is being restructured under new management. What I'm offering you has nothing to do with Hartwell." He paused. "You built a secondary detection system in 8 days on your own, because you looked at an existing system and understood what it was missing. You found an 5.8 million unreported figure that 3 separate audit firms had passed over. You cleared yourself of a forgery accusation in under 4 minutes because you had built your own security protocols and knew them better than the person trying to frame you." He looked at her steadily. "I've been looking for someone capable of building the financial intelligence layer of what I do for some time. I stopped looking when I watched you correct 17 errors and then come back the next morning and correct 17 more." She looked at the document, at her name on it. "You watched me for longer than I knew," she said. "Yes, that's a habit of yours. When the person is worth watching," he said. "Yes." She looked up. He was closer than she expected. Not dramatically, not in any way that declared itself, but she noticed it the way you notice a shift in pressure. "I need to know something," she said. "Ask. The offer," she said carefully, "is professional." "Yes, and the rest of it." He was quiet for a moment. Not a hesitating quiet, a considering one. "The rest of it," he said, "is a conversation I would like to have with you when you're not deciding whether to take my job offer, because I would prefer you to make that decision without that conversation influencing it." She thought about that. "That's surprisingly considerate," she said. "I'm not unsurprised that it surprises you. It shouldn't by now." "No," he said. "It shouldn't." She looked at the document once more, at the window, at the snow continuing to fall over the lake with the patient indifference of Canadian winter. She took a pen from his desk and signed it. He extended his hand. She shook it, steadily, without ceremony, without any of the gratitude that people expected from women in her position, because they had confused being chosen with being saved. She had not been saved. She had been seen, which was different, and she had done the work that proved the seeing right, which was different still. Outside, in the lobby, Thatcher was waiting. He looked at her face and nodded once, a small acknowledgement that contained several things at once. He held the door open. The cold came in. The city was exactly as it had always been. Snow-muffled, enormous, moving with the particular rhythm of a place that has been kept functioning by people it will never think to name. Somewhere in the harbor, a cargo vessel was making its way through the dark water, carrying freight that would reach grocery shelves and hospital supply rooms and hardware stores by morning. Most people would never know. Juniper Voss turned up the collar of her burgundy coat and walked into it,